As many of you may know by now, the search for alien civilizations has been less than ambitious, to say the least, and when we have searched for any evidence of other life being out there, that is to say intelligent life, we have generally gravitated towards life that we're familiar with, that is to say planets that lie within the Goldilocks zone of any given star, and anything that we find to be unusual, inconsistent phenomena, that sort of thing, tend to be dismissed unless they are coming from a planetary system, and from a planetary system that's likely to contain life of some kind similar to ours. This is, of course, an extremely narrow-minded view, a viewpoint that assumes that any sort of intelligent life is going to be similar to us, a similar sort of evolutionary background, and also that they are going to remain where they are, that they aren't going to establish any sort of large megastructures elsewhere in their star system, or perhaps in another star system, or perhaps not orbiting a star at all. After all, if we're talking about an extremely advanced civilization capable of interstellar travel perhaps, then why should they establish all of their settlements and all of their habitation structures and indeed all of their technology in their solar system of origin, especially if they happen to be a machine civilization, for example, a civilization that has transcended biological boundaries and transferred their consciousness into an artificial intelligence of some kind. And as crazy as that idea may sound, that is precisely what Elon Musk is trying to accomplish right now with some of his new projects. It is certainly not beyond the realm of possibility. So why is this the case? Why are we being so restrictive in our search for other civilizations? And also, why is so little effort being spent on trying to find other civilizations? Really, the amount of money being invested in this project is pretty minimal. And most importantly, why are we planning to send a signal to a solar system that looks very promising, a solar system that has several planets in its habitable zone, in the Goldilocks zone, so to speak, that's only about 40 light years away from Earth, before we have any real knowledge of what might be in our neighborhood and whether or not it might be dangerous? Well, in this video, we're going to deal with a number of phenomena that we have detected that indicate, at least to some degree, that there may be something to fear in our cosmos. The possibility of hostile civilizations definitely does exist, and if these civilizations do exist, the technology that is within their grasp, or within the theoretical capability of an extremely advanced civilization, would allow them to destroy ours without them even having to make the trip from their star system to ours. The Trappist-1 star system is perhaps the most exciting thing that we have detected when it comes to exoplanets in history. It is an amazing star system that is very likely to contain life of some kind. There are 7 rocky planets in this solar system, more rocky planets actually than our solar system has, and 3 of those planets lie within the habitable zone of the star star. So in theory, you could have multiple intelligent species of life that could have evolved in this star system. Yeah, unlikely, but it's very possible that this could have happened. And this is our target. On October 4th, 2022, just a few months from now, an organization called METI, which stands for Messaging Extraterrestrials International, is going to transmit powerful radio messages to TRAPPIST-1, a system that is only 40 light years away, by the way. This transmission is going to take place from the Goonhilly Earth Station, which is located in Cornwall, by the way, not very far away from Spaceport Cornwall, and this is going to be the most likely signal that we have ever sent out that may contact other civilizations and have a reasonable chance of a return message being sent. Believe it or not, we have sent no signals of any kind to any star system within a reasonable distance in our history of searching for extraterrestrial life. Now, these messages are going to be innocuous enough. According to the president of METI International, quote, "The radio messages consist of musical and scientific elements that will be sent to TRAPPIST-1, an exoplanet system 39 light years from Earth, and then during the next transmission to the exoplanet K218b, located a distance of 124 light years from Earth. Our messages will remind long-lived civilizations what it was like during their adolescence phase when they were still struggling to become sustainable societies. The information, by the way, also includes elements that suggest our problems with climate change and pollution." Now, TRAPPIST-1 is a unique solar system in other respects as well. For one thing, the star is not a typical star at all. It's what's called an ultra-cool red dwarf. That is to say, a red dwarf that doesn't flare up with any kind of regularity. Red dwarfs are considered to be somewhat dangerous to the development of life because they do flare up with a tremendous amount of radiation that could disrupt the development of life. This one doesn't have those particular features. So the planets orbit considerably closer to the star than ours do and are more similar to the moons orbiting Jupiter than anything else. But what is the most important is the fact that it's only 39 light years away, which means we could theoretically receive a reply in less than a century. A very exciting prospect, to say the least. But at the same time, is this a risk that we should be taking? Is there any evidence in the universe that there might be something dangerous out there? Is there any theoretical technology that could represent a danger to our civilization? And would another civilization have a motive to come after us if they knew of our existence? Well, it's difficult to answer that question because, as I've mentioned a number of times in the past, the vast majority of the scientific community engages in something that Dr. Avi Loeb calls academic bullying. That is to say, making people who put out papers and put out research that suggests the possibility of the existence of extraterrestrial technology, such as Oumuamua, as being crackpots or being unworthy of scientific consideration. For example, there was a natural explanation for Oumuamua based on the idea of a nitrogen iceberg, and then a scientist named Amir Siraj submitted a paper debunking this idea and saying essentially that the nitrogen model was impossible in our universe. And then the submission for this journal was turned over to the researchers for the nitrogen iceberg theory for consideration, and they were given the referee role, shall we say, of determining whether or not this paper was valid, whether or not the nitrogen explanation had indeed been debunked. Now, obviously, there is a serious conflict of interest here, but they were the ones who were given the responsibility, and predictably, they rejected the paper that debunked their theory. Fortunately, there were secondary studies that came out, 2 follow-up papers about the fast erosion of nitrogen icebergs and the fact that this would be a highly unlikely explanation for Oumuamua that came out from independent sources that finally debunked the whole concept once and for all. But this experience gives us an idea of just how difficult it is to engage in a serious search for extraterrestrial civilizations without putting your career in jeopardy. Consequently, many phenomena in our universe have gone uninvestigated, or at least the possibility of extraterrestrial civilizations creating these phenomena tend to be under-investigated if they are considered at all. Przybylski star, I would say, is probably one of the biggest examples of this. A star that I've mentioned a number of times before that has a strange and impossible variety of rare elements inside it, including lots of radioactive elements with short half-lives, such as plutonium, lots and lots of plutonium. There have been some explanations that have been presented, such as being bombarded by neutron stars that could have created this. However, there are no neutron stars in close proximity to Przybylski star, and if they had created these elements inside the star many millions of years ago, when perhaps the star was closer to some neutron stars, then these elements would have decayed a long time ago and would be unobservable. But that isn't the case. Instead, these elements are there, defying all explanation. The most obvious explanation, at least as far as Carl Sagan was concerned when he was talking about technosignatures, would be that an extraterrestrial civilization put those elements inside the star in order to advertise their existence, or perhaps for some other purpose. Perhaps a civilization had had a long and devastating experience with nuclear war and was disposing all of the plutonium in their solar system inside their star in order to render it harmless, or perhaps they're advertising the fact that they have lots and lots of nuclear weapons and messing with them would be a bad idea. And if that's what they're trying to communicate, what are they afraid of? Well, an example of what they might be afraid of is located in pulsar RxJ0806.4-4123. Yeah, these kinds of categorizations are things that you need to get used to when you're studying these sorts of things. It's a pulsar that emits radiation, which is not unusual at all. However, the only radiation that it's giving off is infrared. No other spectrums of radiation or any other kind of light are being emitted by this pulsar, which makes it unique. Now, there are some explanations as to why this might be occurring, but one clear technosignature that would be given off by a Dyson sphere would be the fact that the stellar system would radiate in the infrared. The Dyson sphere would absorb all other kinds of radiation in order to make use of the energy, and you would only have energy radiating out in the infrared. This would seem to be a perfect example of this sort of phenomena if it wasn't for the fact that this was a pulsar, and no sort of life as we know it would exist in a system that had a pulsar, unless, of course, an advanced civilization is making use of the energy that's being generated by a pulsar, which would be tremendous, by the way, and the remaining energy is radiating off in the infrared, which would be a perfect description of a Dyson sphere, or rather a Dyson swarm. A Dyson sphere would obscure the entire star from our vision, but a Dyson swarm would be a collection of objects or satellites orbiting the star which absorb the energy from it. If that is indeed the case, this is a civilization that wields a tremendous, insane amount of power. How much much power, you ask? Well, enough power, for example, to send a fleet of ships powered by light sails or radio sails at relativistic speeds off to conquer another star system if they really wanted to do something like that. But another devastating result, or weapon rather, that could be wielded by a Dyson sphere would be something called a Nicole-Dyson laser, where the satellites of a Dyson swarm can deliver the energy of a star as sort of a mega sunbeam or mega laser to a planet-sized target, and this could be done at distances of thousands, if not millions of light years. And since it would be traveling at the speed of light, we wouldn't even see it coming. We would simply be dead. So the question arises, obviously, what alien civilization would have a motivation to do that, and should that be enough of a reason for us to not send a signal out to the Trappist-1 Solar System? Well, in my opinion, no. In the search for extraterrestrial civilizations, the last thing we should be is paranoid. However, on the other side of the equation, an argument can be made that we really haven't spent enough effort looking for evidence of other civilizations and what they might be capable of and what they might be up to really start sending out signals. We haven't put a great deal of effort into it, and when we do find something, the first inclination is to just say that it's some sort of natural phenomena that we haven't figured out yet. For example, another star that's particularly odd is something called Epic 204 376071. It's only 440 light years from Earth, and it has a strange dimming effect similar to the famous Tabby star. However, this one dims up to 80% as opposed to only 22% for Tabby's star. Now, astronomers thought for a while that they had a really good explanation for that, even though the shape of whatever was passing in front of the star was not spherical, therefore ruling out the possibility of a planet with a ring system fit the description very, very well. So that seemed to be a perfect explanation for whatever was passing in front of this star. However, there was an extreme problem with this model. Anything that was big enough in order to obscure the star to the degree that we were talking about had to be orbiting at a distance of about 10% of that between the Earth and the Sun. Now, that alone would be very strange, having a gas giant with a ring system orbiting that close to the star, but it would also have an orbital period of only 28 days, whereas the event was only observed once in 160 days, which means whatever is orbiting the star can't have an orbital period any shorter than 80 days. So this planet with a ring system is not a perfect explanation for what's happening here. We still don't really understand. And despite what any article you may read has to say about the matter, the possibility of an artificial, massive structure blocking out the star is still something that we need to consider. And the list of unexplained phenomena goes on and on. Recently, for example, quote, looking towards the center of the galaxy, we found ASKAP J173608.2-321635, named after its coordinates, unquote. I really think, by the way, they should come up with another name for this thing. This, by the way, was a quote from Professor Tara Murphy. And Professor Murphy, by the way, is the co-author of a paper about a highly polarized transient point source that would use the Australian SKA Pathfinder. That is to say, they found an unusual radio signal at the center of the galaxy, and so far, this has defied all explanation. Quote, the object was unique in that it started out invisible, became bright, faded away, and then reappeared. This behavior was extraordinary. The The strangest property of this new signal is that it has a very high polarization. This means its light oscillates in only one direction, but that direction rotates with time. By the way, I'm reading off of the paper. The brightness of the object also varies dramatically by a factor of 100, and the signal switches on and off apparently at random. We've never seen anything like it. And by the way, all potential natural explanations for this strange radio signal have come up empty. Quote, "At first we thought it could be a pulsar, a very dense type of spinning dead star, or else a type of star that emits huge solar flares. But the signals from this new source don't match what we expect from these types of celestial objects." They also considered magnetars, by the way. This is a very common explanation for things like fast radio bursts. Quote, "All radio magnetars show very high degrees of polarization, but their flat radio spectra, in contrast for what we see, makes a magnetar an unlikely interpretation," unquote. The astronomers tried to find the source of the object in the visible spectrum. However, they found absolutely nothing, and then they waited for a considerable amount of time to see if the signal would return. And it indeed returned, but the behavior of the source was completely different, and the source also disappeared in a single day, even though it had lasted for weeks in previous observations. This is a very strange signal, to say the least, and it's not the only one that we've picked up. There are other signals that we've picked up from the galactic center that have very unique qualities. One in particular flares in a predictable pattern. However, every time it does flare, it's not for the same length of time. However, there is a pattern to its pulsing that allowed astronomers to predict when it would be active and when it would be inactive. They can't explain what's causing it, but they can at least predict its periods of activity. This I find to be incredibly fascinating. Is this a signal from another civilization? Well, if so, it doesn't seem to follow any sort of pattern that we can understand. But at the same time, if you just wanted to send out a beacon of some kind from the center of the galaxy, perhaps a warning beacon, for example, a great way to do it would be to send out a very powerful radio signal that would be impossible to ignore, impossible to explain with any sort of natural causes, and yet follow a very specific pattern of activity that could be tracked and recorded. Something like that could have a very obvious artificial explanation if we would just be open-minded enough to look at that possibility. It could be that someone is simply trying to broadcast the fact that there is a civilization of some kind at the center of the galaxy, or perhaps there's something about the center of the galaxy that we should avoid. My point is, we don't know enough yet. We haven't spent enough quality time examining these phenomena and being open-minded enough to determine what would be the ramifications if they were coming from another civilization. And perhaps this is something that we should gain a better understanding of before we start broadcasting our location to other civilizations that may not wish us well. If you like this type of content and you want to see more of it, please subscribe to my channel, and also check out the description for many ways to become a supporter and to join my Discord community of followers and all the benefits that come with that. So until the scientific community becomes open-minded enough to look through the telescope as Galileo's contemporaries centuries ago refused to do, and look with an open mind at these phenomena to determine whether or not they are natural, or perhaps there may be another explanation that we aren't considering enough. Until this moment arrives, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.